The deafening clamor of the bustling Silver Creek market faded to a hollow echo as Eliza Nelson felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The summer heat of 1878 was unforgiving, beating down on her cotton bonnet as she clutched her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant and alone in a town that wasn't hers, she reached desperately for something to steady herself as the ground seemed to rush toward her face. The basket of fresh apples she'd been carrying tumbled from her grasp, red fruit scattering across the dusty Wyoming street like droplets of blood. Just as darkness threatened to consume her vision entirely, strong arms caught her from behind. The rough fabric of a stranger's shirt pressed against her cheek as she sagged against him, her consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. "Whoa there, madam," a deep voice drawled above her, steady as bedrock. "I've got you." Eliza tried to respond, but her tongue felt swollen, her mouth as dry as the territory's endless prairies. She was vaguely aware of being lowered gently to a seated position, her back propped against the wooden post of a market stall. "Someone fetch the doctor." A woman's voice called from somewhere in the gathering crowd. "Give her some space, folks," the man who'd caught her commanded, his tone brooking no argument. Through the haze of her fading vision, Eliza made out the silhouette of a tall figure kneeling before her. The rim of a worn cowboy hat shaded a face lined by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Here, madam," he said, uncorking the canteen with his teeth while supporting her head with one hand. "Small sips now." The water was cool against her parched lips, and Eliza drank gratefully, feeling life slowly seep back into her limbs. When she'd had enough, the stranger unwrapped the cloth bundle to reveal a chunk of sourdough bread. "You need to eat something," he said, tearing off a small piece and holding it to her mouth. "You're eating for two, by the looks of it." Despite her embarrassment at being fed like a child in front of half the town, Eliza accepted the morsel. The simple bread tasted better than any fine dining she'd ever known, each bite restoring her strength as surely as if it were medicine. "Thank you," she whispered when she could finally find her voice. "I'm Eliza Nelson." The cowboy's weathered face softened into a smile that transformed his features from handsome to downright breathtaking. "Xavier Navarro, at your service, Mrs. Nelson." He emphasized the Mrs. slightly, his eyes flicking briefly to her wedding band. Eliza's hand instinctively moved to cover the simple gold ring, a reminder of promises made and broken. "It's Miss Nelson now," she said quietly. "My husband. He's no longer with us." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or understanding. Before he could respond, the crowd parted to make way for Silver Creek's aging doctor. "What have we here?" Dr. Patterson asked, kneeling beside Eliza with creaking joints. "Fainted, did you, young lady?" "Yes, sir," Eliza replied, feeling stronger but still lightheaded. "I haven't eaten since yesterday, I'm afraid. The journey was longer than expected, and my funds are limited." The doctor clucked his tongue disapprovingly as he checked her pulse. "A woman in your condition should never skip meals. Where are you staying?" Eliza hesitated, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I only arrived on the morning stage. I haven't secured lodgings yet." Xavier, who had stepped back to give the doctor room, spoke up. "The boarding house on Pine Street has a vacancy. Mrs. Holloway keeps a clean place." "I'm not sure I can afford," Eliza began. "Nonsense," Xavier interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "Mrs. Holloway owes me a favor. I'll see to it you have a room, at least for tonight." Before Eliza could protest further, Xavier had gathered her scattered purchases, paid the apple vendor for the bruised fruit, and signaled to a boy lounging nearby. "Tommy, run ahead to Mrs. Holloway's and tell her to prepare her best room. We've got a lady in need." The boy nodded and took off like a shot, bare feet kicking up dust as he raced down the street. With the doctor's grudging approval, Xavier helped Eliza to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he immediately offered his arm for support. "Thank you, Mr. Navarro, but I've imposed enough," Eliza said, embarrassed by the attention they were attracting. "Xavier," he corrected with a small smile. "And it's no imposition. Silver Creek takes care of its own." "But I'm not one of your own," she pointed out. "I'm just passing through." Something in Xavier's expression changed, a sudden intensity in his steel-gray eyes that made Eliza's heart skip a beat. Then consider this Western hospitality, Miss Nelson. We don't let pregnant women collapse in our streets without doing something about it. Reluctantly, Eliza accepted his arm, keenly aware of the solid muscle beneath his cotton shirt. As they made their slow way down Silver Creek's main street, she found herself studying her rescuer from beneath lowered lashes. Xavier Navarro was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders that tapered to a trim waist. His dark hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his shirt, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. Unlike many of the cowboys she'd observed since arriving in Wyoming territory, he carried no visible weapon, though the way he moved suggested he knew how to handle himself in a fight. "You're not from around here either, are you, Mr. Navarro?" she asked, noting the slight accent that colored his words, something that hinted at Spanish heritage. He glanced down at her, one corner of his mouth lifting. "What gave me away?" "Your name, for one," Eliza replied. "And you don't quite have the look of a man who's spent his whole life in these parts." Xavier chuckled, a rich sound that seemed to warm her from the inside. "Perceptive. My father was from northern Mexico, my mother from Boston. I've spent time in both worlds and belong fully to neither." The simple honesty of his statement struck a chord with Eliza. She, too, had spent her life caught between worlds, the respectable society of her upbringing and the precarious existence she now faced as an unmarried mother-to-be. "Here we are," Xavier announced as they approached a tidy 2-story structure with lace curtains visible through spotless windows. "Mrs. Holloway runs the finest boarding house this side of Cheyenne." The door swung open before they reached the porch steps, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman whose shrewd eyes took in Eliza's condition with a single glance. "So this is the young lady Tommy told me about," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious for such a sturdy frame. Come in. I've got a room ready and soup on the stove." Eliza hesitated on the threshold. "Mrs. Holloway, I should tell you that my current financial situation is now. The older woman interrupted, ushering her inside with a gentle but firm hand. "Xavier here has explained everything. You're to stay as my guest until you're back on your feet." Eliza shot Xavier a questioning look, but he merely tipped his hat with a small smile. "Mrs. Holloway, I'll leave Miss Nelson in your capable hands. I've got business at the ranch that won't wait." Of course, Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Will you be joining us for supper? I'm making my famous chicken and dumplings." A flash of something regret, perhaps, crossed Xavier's face. "I'm afraid not. The foreman's expecting me back before nightfall." Eliza found herself unexpectedly disappointed. "Thank you again, Mr. Navarro. I don't know how I can repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," he replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than propriety strictly allowed. "Just take care of yourself and that little one." His gaze dropped briefly to her rounded belly before he stepped back, replacing his hat. "Good day, ladies." As Xavier strode away, Mrs. Holloway closed the door and turned to Eliza with a knowing smile. "That's a good man, Xavier Navarro. One of the few in these parts worth a second glance." "I'm not looking for a man, Mrs. Holloway," Eliza said firmly, one hand protectively cradling her stomach. "I've had quite enough of them to last a lifetime." The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. "Of course, dear. Now, let's get you settled. You look dead on your feet." The room Mrs. Holloway showed her to was small but immaculate, with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window overlooking a small garden in the back of the house. Fresh wildflowers brightened the simple dresser, and a quilt that had clearly been made with loving hands adorned the bed. "This is lovely," Eliza said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "Far nicer than I expected to find in a frontier town." Mrs. Holloway beamed with pride. "Silver Creek might be small, but we've got our share of civilization. Now you rest. I'll bring up some soup and bread in a bit." Left alone, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over her in waves. She'd been traveling for weeks, making her way west from Philadelphia after her husband's death, or rather, after discovering that James Nelson had never actually been her husband at all, having a wife already in Chicago whom he'd neglected to mention. The scandal had been immediate and devastating. Her parents, pillars of Philadelphia society, had given her a choice. Give up the child for adoption and return to the fold with a story about a convenient widowhood, or leave and never return. With nothing but a small inheritance from her grandmother and the clothes she could pack in 2 valises, Eliza had chosen the latter. Now, 7 months pregnant and nearly penniless, she found herself in a town she'd never heard of until yesterday, dependent on the kindness of strangers. As she lay back on the clean sheets, Eliza allowed herself a moment of self-pity, a single tear tracking down her temple and into her hair. She must have dozed off, for she awoke to a gentle knock at the door and Mrs. Holloway's voice calling, "Supper, dear." The soup was everything a body weakened by hunger and exhaustion could want: rich broth, tender chunks of chicken, and dumplings light as clouds. Eliza ate every bite, along with 2 slices of freshly baked bread slathered with sweet butter. "This is wonderful," she sighed, setting aside the empty bowl. "I can't remember the last time I had such a meal." Mrs. Holloway studied her with kind but assessing eyes. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings you to Silver Creek? We don't get many young ladies in your condition passing through alone." Eliza hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. This woman had opened her home. She deserved the truth. "I'm looking for work. I was a teacher back east, and I heard that frontier towns are often in need of educated women to instruct the children." "A teacher?" Mrs. Holloway exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Well, isn't that providential? Our schoolmarm, Miss Perkins, is getting married next month and moving to her fiancé's ranch near Laramie. The town council's been in a state about finding a replacement before the fall term." Hope, an emotion Eliza had almost forgotten, flickered to life in her chest. "Do you really think they might consider me? Even in my condition?" Mrs. Holloway's expression sobered. "I won't lie to you, dear. There will be talk. Silver Creek has its share of gossips, and those who appoint themselves the moral guardians of others. But we also have practical people who value education and know that good teachers are hard to come by in these parts." She patted Eliza's hand. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to Mayor Hargrove. He chairs the school board, and his wife was an Eastern lady before she came west. If anyone can appreciate your qualifications, it's Margaret Hargrove." Exhausted but with a renewed sense of purpose, Eliza slept deeply that night, her dreams for once untroubled by the ghosts of her past. Morning brought clear skies and a decision. After a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, Eliza changed into her best dress, a simple navy blue cotton that did its best to accommodate her changing figure, and allowed Mrs. Holloway to escort her to the mayor's office. Mayor Hargrove proved to be a jovial man with a walrus mustache and intelligent eyes. His wife, as Mrs. Holloway had predicted, took one look at Eliza's neat appearance and articulate speech and declared her exactly what our little school needs. "But there is the matter of—" Mayor Hargrove gestured vaguely toward Eliza's midsection, his cheeks reddening slightly. "My pregnancy," Eliza supplied calmly. "Yes, I'm aware that it presents certain complications. However, I assure you that I am a widow, not some fallen woman, and that my dedication to education is unwavering." Margaret Hargrove exchanged a look with her husband. Perhaps Miss Nelson could begin immediately as Miss Perkins' assistant? That would give her time to establish herself before taking over the classroom, and by then, her child will have arrived, and the initial gossip will have died down. Mayor Hargrove stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "That could work. Miss Perkins has been complaining that 42 students is too many for one teacher anyway." He turned to Eliza. "The position pays $30 a month, with quarters in the rooms above the schoolhouse. Would that be acceptable?" Eliza could scarcely believe her good fortune. "More than acceptable, Mayor Hargrove. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity." By noon, Eliza had been introduced to Miss Perkins, a thin, bird-like woman with a surprisingly booming voice, and shown the schoolhouse where she would both work and live. The building was newer than most in town, with large windows to admit light and fresh air, and the living quarters upstairs, while basic, were clean and private. "It seems I've landed on my feet after all," Eliza remarked to Mrs. Holloway as they walked back to the boarding house to collect her meager belongings. "I can't thank you enough for your help." "Nonsense," the older woman replied with a wave of her hand. "I didn't do anything but introduce you to the right people. You impressed them all on your own." As they turned onto Main Street, Eliza's attention was caught by a familiar figure emerging from the general store. Xavier Navarro, dressed in a clean shirt and dark vest, was loading packages into saddlebags draped over a magnificent black gelding. The sight of him sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Mrs. Holloway followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Shall we say hello? I'm sure he'd be pleased to hear your good news." Before Eliza could protest, Mrs. Holloway had changed course, steering them directly toward Xavier. He looked up at their approach, his weather-tanned face breaking into a warm smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Miss Nelson, you're looking much improved today." Eliza felt a blush rising to her cheeks and silently cursed her fair complexion. "Thanks to your timely intervention yesterday and Mrs. Holloway's excellent care." "Eliza has some exciting news," Mrs. Holloway announced, giving Eliza a gentle nudge forward. "Indeed." Xavier raised an eyebrow, his gray eyes fixed on Eliza's face with an intensity that made her momentarily forget what she was supposed to say. "I've been offered a position at the school," she finally managed. "I'm to assist Miss Perkins until she leaves, then take over as the teacher." Genuine pleasure lit Xavier's features. "That's wonderful news. Silver Creek's children will be fortunate to have you." "You're very kind," Eliza replied, wondering why this man's good opinion should matter so much to her. "Though I suspect some in town might not share your enthusiasm once they learn of my situation." Xavier's expression hardened slightly. "Anyone who would judge you without knowing your story isn't worth your concern, Miss Nelson." "Well said," Mrs. Holloway agreed. "Now, Xavier, since you're here, perhaps you could help Eliza move her things to the schoolhouse? An expectant mother shouldn't be carrying heavy valises." "My bags aren't heavy," Eliza began to protest. "I'd be happy to," Xavier interrupted, securing his purchases and mounting his horse in one fluid motion. "I'll meet you ladies at the boarding house in 10 minutes, if that suits." Before Eliza could formulate a polite refusal, Mrs. Holloway had agreed, and Xavier was riding off to stable his horse at the livery. "Mrs. Holloway," Eliza said with a hint of exasperation once he was out of earshot, "I appreciate your help, but I don't need a man to carry my bags. And I certainly don't need you playing matchmaker." The older woman's eyes widened in exaggerated innocence. "Matchmaker? Why, Eliza Nelson, what a thought. I'm simply ensuring you don't overtax yourself in your condition. Doctor's orders, you know." Eliza wasn't fooled for a moment, but she couldn't maintain her annoyance in the face of Mrs. Holloway's genuine concern for her welfare. "Very well, but please understand that I'm not looking for romance. My experience with men has been disillusioning, to say the least." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "Not all men are like the one who left you in this predicament, dear. Some are honorable to their bones." "Perhaps," Eliza conceded. "But right now, my focus must be on establishing myself and preparing for this child. I can't afford distractions." By the time they reached the boarding house, Xavier was waiting on the porch, hat in hand. He insisted on carrying both of Eliza's valises despite her protests that she could manage at least one. "My mother raised me better than to let a lady, especially one in your condition, carry her own luggage while I walk empty-handed," he said firmly, hoisting the bags as if they weighed nothing. The walk to the schoolhouse took them past the market where Eliza had fainted the day before. Several vendors called out greetings to Xavier, and more than a few curious glances were directed at Eliza. She held her head high, determined not to show how much the scrutiny affected her. "Don't mind them," Xavier said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." "I'm used to being the subject of whispers," Eliza replied with a slight lift of her chin. "In Philadelphia, my situation caused quite the scandal." Xavier studied her profile for a moment. "Their loss is Silver Creek's gain, then." The simple statement, delivered without a hint of flirtation or ulterior motive, touched Eliza more deeply than florid compliments ever could. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." When they reached the schoolhouse, Xavier carried her bags upstairs to the small apartment and set them carefully beside the narrow bed. The room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a small cook stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the window. "It's not much," Eliza said, suddenly seeing the humble space through his eyes. "It's a good start," Xavier countered, his gaze sweeping the room before returning to her face. The school committee will likely be amenable to improvements if you present them properly. This town values education more than most in the territory. You seem to know Silver Creek well, Eliza observed. I've been here 5 years, he replied. Came west after the war looking for a fresh start, like so many others. Found work at the Rocking R Ranch and eventually became foreman. A smile tugged at his mouth. It's a good life most days. The mention of the war surprised Eliza. Xavier couldn't be much older than 30, which would have made him very young during the conflict that had torn the nation apart. You fought in the war? She asked. A shadow passed over his features. Union cavalry. Enlisted at 17, lying about my age. Saw things no boy should see. He shook his head slightly, as if to dislodge unwelcome memories. But that's ancient history now. Eliza recognized the desire to change the subject and respected it. Well, I won't keep you any longer, Mr. Navarro. I'm sure you have duties at your ranch. Xavier, he reminded her, settling his hat back on his head. And yes, I should be going. But perhaps I could call on you sometime to see how you're settling in. The question was asked casually, but Eliza sensed its importance. Part of her, the wounded, wary part, wanted to refuse, to keep this handsome, kind man at a safe distance. But another part, a part she'd thought dead after James's betrayal, stirred with tentative interest. I would like that, she heard herself say. The smile that lit Xavier's face was worth any risk. Good. Until then, Miss Nelson. He was halfway down the stairs when Eliza called after him. Eliza. My name is Eliza. Xavier paused, looking back up at her with those storm-gray eyes. Until then, Eliza. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Eliza settled into her new role at the school. Miss Perkins, while somewhat rigid in her methods, proved generous in sharing her knowledge of the students and curriculum. The children, after initial curiosity about the new teacher and her expanding waistline, accepted her presence with the remarkable adaptability of youth. True to his word, Xavier called on her the following Sunday afternoon, arriving at the schoolhouse with a small potted plant and a book of poetry by Walt Whitman. The plant is from Mrs. Holloway's garden, he explained as Eliza invited him in. She thought it might brighten your quarters. The book is from me. I remembered you mentioning you enjoyed poetry. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Eliza placed the plant on her windowsill and ran her fingers reverently over the book's leather binding. This is lovely. Thank you. They talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing tea and the apple cake Mrs. Holloway had sent along with the plant. Eliza learned that Xavier had a younger sister in San Francisco, that he could read and write in both English and Spanish, and that he harbored dreams of someday owning his own ranch. In turn, she told him about growing up in Philadelphia, her love of teaching, and her passion for literature. She carefully avoided any mention of James or the circumstances that had brought her west, and Xavier, with an intuition that surprised her, never pressed for details she wasn't ready to share. As summer gave way to autumn, Xavier's visits became a regular occurrence. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a jar of honey from a local beekeeper, a length of pretty ribbon from the general store, wild strawberries he'd found while riding the range. Other times he simply brought his company, which Eliza found herself valuing more with each passing week. They developed a routine of Sunday afternoon walks when weather permitted, strolling along Silver Creek itself or through the small town park. Eliza was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments their friendship generated, but Xavier seemed completely unconcerned by the town gossip. Let them talk, he said when she mentioned it one crisp October afternoon as they walked beneath trees aflame with autumn colors. I've never much cared for others' opinions of my personal affairs. It's different for a woman, Eliza pointed out, especially one in my position. I'm trying to establish myself as a respectable teacher here. Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. Is my company damaging your reputation, Eliza? Because if so, no. She interrupted hastily. That's not what I meant at all. Your friendship has been. She searched for the right word. Invaluable to me. Relief softened his features. Good. Because I value our time together more than I can say. There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that both thrilled and frightened Eliza. She was saved from having to respond by a sharp kick from within that made her gasp and press a hand to her side. Xavier's concern was immediate. Are you all right? Should I fetch the doctor? Eliza laughed, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly where the baby was still moving vigorously. No need for a doctor. Someone's just practicing for the cavalry. The wonder that transformed Xavier's face as he felt the child move beneath his palm stirred something profound in Eliza's heart. This man, who had no obligation to her or her unborn child, looked at that moment as though he'd been given a precious gift. "That's amazing," he whispered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're amazing, Eliza Nelson." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. He pulled back almost immediately, uncertainty replacing the wonder in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." Eliza silenced him by rising on tiptoe and returning the kiss, allowing herself this one moment of sweetness amid the challenges of her life. When they parted, Xavier's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I've wanted to do that since the day you opened your eyes in the marketplace," he admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I'm glad you waited until I was conscious," Eliza replied with a small laugh, trying to lighten the moment even as her pulse raced. Xavier chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "Eliza, I know your situation is complicated. I know there's a story there that you haven't shared, and I respect your privacy. But I want you to know that my intentions toward you are honorable. I care for you deeply." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Eliza found herself wanting desperately to believe him. But James had seemed sincere too, in the beginning. "Xavier," she began, stepping back slightly, "I care for you as well. More than I expected to care for anyone again. But there are things you don't know about me, about my past." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Whatever it is, it won't change how I feel." And so, as they resumed their walk at a slower pace, Eliza told him everything about meeting James Nelson at a literary society meeting in Philadelphia, about his charm and apparent devotion, about the private ceremony he'd insisted upon due to family complications, and about discovering, 3 months into her pregnancy, that he was already married with 2 children in Chicago. "When his real wife appeared on our doorstep, I thought my world had ended," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the pain the memories still evoked. "My parents were mortified by the scandal. They offered to send me to a home for unwed mothers, where I could give birth in secret and give up the baby for adoption. Then I could return to society with a story about a brief, tragic marriage. But you refused," Xavier guessed, his hand warm around hers. Eliza nodded. "I couldn't abandon my child. So I took what money I had and headed west, where no one would know me or my story. I thought I might reinvent myself somewhere, build a new life for us both." "And you have," Xavier said firmly. "You're doing it right here in Silver Creek." They had reached the schoolhouse again, and Eliza turned to face him, needing him to understand. "But don't you see? I'm not a respectable widow. I was never actually married. My child is illegitimate. If the school board knew the truth, they won't hear it from me," Xavier assured her. "And if they did somehow discover it, I'd stand by you. Many in this town would." He squeezed her hand gently. "People out here tend to judge others more by their actions than their pasts. You're a good teacher and a good person, Eliza. That matters more than some mistake made back east." His unwavering support brought tears to her eyes. "You are a remarkable man, Xavier Navarro." "Not remarkable," he corrected with a small smile. "Just someone who recognizes quality when he sees it." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Now, no more tears. It's getting chilly, and you should be inside." As he turned to leave, Eliza caught his hand. "Will you come for dinner tomorrow evening? I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew." The invitation surprised him, but pleasure quickly replaced his momentary confusion. "I'd be honored." 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, she confirmed, suddenly shy. As October gave way to November, Xavier became a regular visitor at the schoolhouse. 3 evenings a week, he would appear at her door after the students had gone home, sometimes with provisions for dinner, other times simply to help with tasks around the small apartment. He hung shelves, fixed a loose floorboard, and brought firewood to stack beside her stove in preparation for the coming winter. Miss Perkins, whose wedding was now mere weeks away, observed their growing closeness with a mixture of concern and approval. Mr. Navarro seems quite devoted, she remarked one afternoon as she and Eliza prepared lessons. But you should be careful, my dear. Your position here is still new, and while most people respect Xavier, there are those who remember he's half Mexican and fought for the Union. Old prejudices die hard in these parts. I'm well aware of the town's scrutiny, Eliza replied, arranging primers on the students' desks. But Xavier has been nothing but a perfect gentleman, and I won't deny myself friendship because of gossip. Miss Perkins studied her thoughtfully. Is it only friendship, though? Because from where I stand, it looks a great deal like courtship. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. We haven't defined it as such. Perhaps you should, the older teacher suggested gently. For both your sakes. And soon, I would think, given your condition. The baby was indeed making its presence increasingly known, kicking vigorously at all hours, and causing Eliza's back to ache after long days on her feet. Dr. Patterson, who checked on her weekly now, estimated she had less than a month before delivery. That evening, when Xavier arrived with a rabbit he'd snared for their dinner, Eliza found herself watching him as he moved comfortably around her small kitchen, preparing the meat for the pot while she chopped vegetables. There was an easy domesticity to their interactions now, a natural rhythm that felt both novel and somehow ancient, as if they'd been doing this dance for years instead of weeks. You're staring, Xavier observed without looking up from his task. Do I have flour on my face? Eliza smiled, caught out. No, I was just thinking about how natural this feels. You being here, us preparing dinner together. Xavier set down his knife and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. It feels right to me too, Eliza. Being with you, taking care of you and the little one, he gestured toward her belly. It's all I want to do, for as long as you'll let me. The simple declaration made her heart race. Xavier, let me finish, he said gently, taking her hands in his. I know we haven't known each other long, and I know your trust has been badly damaged. But I love you, Eliza Nelson. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you are with the children at school, and the way your eyes light up when you talk about books. I even love your stubbornness when you insist on doing things yourself that I could easily help with. A laugh escaped her, half joy and half nervous surprise. I'm not asking for an answer right now, Xavier continued. I know you need time. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to marry you and adopt your child as my own. I want to build a life with you, Eliza. Tears filled her eyes as emotions warred within her hope and fear, joy and caution. Xavier, I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after everything that happened. But marriage, it's such a risk. All of life is a risk, he replied, brushing a tear from her cheek. But some risks are worth taking. Before she could respond, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at the edge of the table for support. Xavier's hands steadied her immediately. Eliza? What is it? I don't know, she panted as the pain receded. It felt like another spasm cut off her words, this one stronger than the first. Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes. The baby. It's coming. But it's too early, Eliza protested, fear clutching at her heart. Dr. Patterson said I had weeks yet. Babies don't always follow doctor's schedules, Xavier said, remarkably calm as he helped her to a chair. Sit here. I'm going to fetch Dr. Patterson and Mrs. Holloway. Don't leave me, Eliza pleaded, gripping his hand as another contraction built. Xavier knelt before her, his eyes steady on hers. Listen to me. I will be back before you know it. You're strong, Eliza Nelson. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. You can do this. He pressed a swift kiss to her forehead and was gone, his boots thundering down the stairs. Alone, Eliza focused on her breathing, trying to remember what little she knew about childbirth from books and the whispered conversations of married friends. It seemed both an eternity and mere moments before she heard voices on the stairs. Mrs. Holloway burst into the room, followed closely by Dr. Patterson and, to Eliza's surprise, Margaret Hargrove. There's our girl, Mrs. Holloway said briskly, immediately taking charge. Let's get you comfortable. Margaret, put water on to boil. Doctor, where do you want her? The bed would be best, Dr. Patterson replied, setting his bag on the table. As they helped Eliza to her feet, she looked around for Xavier. Where, Your young man is pacing a trench in the schoolyard, Mrs. Holloway informed her with a small smile. The doctor thought it best he wait downstairs. He's not leaving? Eliza asked, surprised. Wild horses couldn't drag him away, Margaret Hargrove assured her. Now, let's get you ready to meet this baby. What followed was the most grueling experience of Eliza's life. Hours of pain unlike anything she'd imagined, interspersed with moments of terrible clarity as she faced the reality that she might not survive this ordeal that had claimed so many women before her. Through it all, Mrs. Holloway and Margaret Hargrove were her anchors, wiping her brow, helping her change positions, murmuring encouragement. Dr. Patterson maintained a professional demeanor, but even he looked concerned as the labor stretched past midnight and into the early hours of the morning. You need to push now, Miss Nelson, he finally instructed. With everything you've got. Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Eliza bore down, a primal scream tearing from her throat as the worst pain yet ripped through her body. And then, suddenly, blessed relief and the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. A girl, Dr. Patterson announced, his voice gentler than Eliza had ever heard it. A perfect little girl. Tears streamed down Eliza's face as Mrs. Holloway placed the tiny, squalling bundle on her chest. Hello, little one, she whispered, marveling at the perfection of her daughter's miniature features. Hello, my love. After the afterbirth was delivered and both mother and child cleaned up, Mrs. Holloway went to the window and opened it slightly. A low whistle from below was answered immediately. Is she all right? Xavier's voice called up, tense with worry. Both mother and daughter are doing just fine, Mrs. Holloway called back. You can come up now, if the doctor approves. Dr. Patterson, packing his instruments, nodded his assent. A few minutes only. They both need rest. When Xavier appeared in the doorway, his face haggard from hours of anxious waiting, Eliza felt her heart expand with love so powerful it took her breath away. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in her arms. You have a daughter, Eliza said softly. Would you like to meet her? Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise at the phrasing, but he moved closer, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. Eliza adjusted the blanket to reveal the sleeping infant's face. She's beautiful, he whispered, tentatively touching one tiny fist with his finger. Immediately, the baby's hand opened and then closed around his fingertip in a surprisingly strong grip. The wonder that transformed Xavier's tired features was something Eliza knew she would remember until her dying day. What will you call her? He asked, gently extracting his finger only to have the baby grasp it again, as if unwilling to let him go. Eliza had considered many names over the months of her pregnancy, but in this moment, only one seemed right. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. Xavier's eyes met hers, and in them she saw everything she'd ever wanted: love, acceptance, the promise of a future. It's perfect. She's perfect. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat discreetly. We should let them rest now. Xavier, you can come back in the morning. He nodded, reluctantly rising from the bed. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Anything at all. Actually, Eliza said, making a sudden decision, there is something I need. When he paused, waiting, she continued, an answer. Yes. Xavier looked confused for a moment. Then understanding dawned. Yes? You mean, yes, I'll marry you, Eliza clarified, her heart so full she thought it might burst. If the offer still stands. The joy that blazed across his face was answer enough, but he returned to her side and took her free hand in his. The offer stands. Now and always. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat loudly. I believe I said a few minutes only. Out with you, Navarro. Your fiancé needs sleep. Xavier pressed a gentle kiss to Eliza's forehead, then an even gentler one to baby Hope's downy head. I'll be back at first light, he promised. After everyone had gone and Eliza was alone with her sleeping daughter, she gazed down at the miracle in her arms and whispered, We're going to be all right, little one. Better than all right. We're going to be a family. The news of Hope's birth spread through Silver Creek faster than a prairie fire, and by mid-morning, Eliza's small apartment was filled with flowers, food, and baby things from townspeople she barely knew. Miss Perkins arrived with a beautiful hand-knitted blanket, and Mayor Hargrove himself delivered a rocking cradle that he'd commissioned from the town carpenter. A gift from the school board, he explained gruffly, clearly uncomfortable in the presence of a new mother and infant. And, we've decided you should take a month's leave with full pay. Miss Perkins has agreed to postpone her departure until after Christmas. That's very generous, Eliza said, genuinely touched by the town's support. Yes, well, the mayor shifted awkwardly. Margaret insisted. And what Margaret wants, Margaret gets. His mustache twitched in what might have been a smile. Congratulations, Miss Nelson. She's a fine-looking child. Xavier arrived as the mayor was leaving, his arms full of packages. I've brought supplies, he announced, setting his burdens on the table. And news. News? Eliza asked, adjusting hope at her breast where the baby was nursing contentedly. Xavier's eyes softened at the sight before he continued. I spoke with Reverend Michaels this morning. He can marry us next Sunday, if that suits you. Eliza blinked in surprise. So soon? Unless you'd prefer to wait? Xavier looked suddenly uncertain. No, Eliza said quickly. Sunday is perfect. But are you sure, Xavier? Once we're married, my past becomes your burden too. The gossip, the scandal, if it ever comes out, let it come out. He interrupted, kneeling beside her chair. I don't care, Eliza. I never have. All I care about is you and hope and the life we'll build together. The utter certainty in his voice dispelled her lingering doubts. Then Sunday it is. The next few days passed in a blur of adjusting to motherhood and preparing for a wedding. Mrs. Holloway and Margaret Hargrove took charge of the arrangements, insisting that Eliza focus on recovering her strength and caring for Hope. Xavier divided his time between the ranch, where he was training his replacement as foreman, and the schoolhouse, where he continued the renovations he'd begun weeks earlier. The owner of the Rocking R, impressed by Xavier's dedication and skill, had offered him a partnership in the use of a small cabin on the ranch's eastern boundary, close enough to town for Eliza to resume teaching when she was ready, but with land of their own to eventually build upon. By Sunday, Eliza felt strong enough to walk to the church, though Xavier insisted on carrying Hope. The simple ceremony was attended by more townspeople than Eliza had expected, including several of her students and their families. As she stood before Reverend Michaels in her best dress hastily altered by Mrs. Holloway to accommodate her post-pregnancy figure, with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby, Eliza felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the hardships that had brought her to this moment. I, Xavier James Navarro, take thee, Eliza Marie Nelson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Xavier's deep voice rang out clear and steady. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Eliza's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her words were no less sincere. As Reverend Michaels pronounced them man and wife, Xavier's kiss was both tender and promising, a pledge of all the days to come. The small reception at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a joyful affair, with food contributed by half the women in town and music provided by a trio of miners who played fiddle, banjo, and harmonica with surprising skill. Hope was passed from one admiring pair of arms to another, seemingly content with all the attention. She has your eyes, Xavier observed as they watched Mrs. Holloway cooing over the baby. But I think that chin might be all her father's. A shadow crossed Eliza's face at the mention of James, but Xavier quickly continued, her real father. The one who will raise her and love her and teach her to ride and read and do all the things fathers should. Eliza's heart swelled with love for this man who could so easily claim a child not of his blood. She's lucky to have you. We both are. Later that evening, as they settled into the cabin that was now their home, with Hope sleeping in her cradle beside their bed, Xavier drew Eliza into his arms. Happy? He asked, searching her face in the soft lamplight. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. When I fainted in that marketplace, I thought I'd reached the end of my rope. I never imagined it was actually the beginning of everything good. Xavier smiled, running a gentle hand over her hair. I knew the moment I caught you that I'd never let you fall again. Not if I could help it. My hero, Eliza teased lightly, though they both knew there was truth beneath the jest. Your husband, he corrected, his voice deepening as he lowered his mouth to hers. Now and always. Spring 1879 found the Navarro family thriving. Eliza had returned to teaching in January, bringing hope with her each day. The students, particularly the older girls, delighted in helping care for the baby between lessons, and Eliza found that motherhood had somehow made her a better teacher, more patient, more understanding of the unique challenges each child faced. Xavier had thrown himself into improving their small homestead, adding a proper kitchen and a nursery for Hope, with plans for further expansion as their family grew. The partnership at the Rocking R was proving profitable, and he'd already purchased a small herd of cattle that would form the nucleus of their own ranch someday. On a warm Sunday in May, they celebrated Hope's 6-month birthday with a picnic by Silver Creek, the same spot where Xavier had first kissed Eliza. As they watched their daughter practice sitting up on a blanket, grabbing at wildflowers with chubby hands, Eliza leaned against her husband's solid shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If I hadn't fainted that day, or if someone else had caught me?" Xavier's arm tightened around her waist. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, but I do thank God every day that I was in that marketplace at that exact moment." "As do I," Eliza said softly. "Though I was mortified at the time, having a handsome stranger feed me bread like a child in front of half the town." Xavier chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "You were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even pale as death and about to collapse. When you opened your eyes and looked at me, I was a goner." "Even knowing I was carrying another man's child?" Eliza asked, a question she'd never voiced before. Xavier turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "Hope may not have my blood, but she has my heart, just as completely as you do. She's my daughter in every way that matters." As if sensing she was being discussed, Hope let out a happy shriek and toppled sideways, prompting both parents to laugh. "She's got your determination," Xavier observed as the baby righted herself and reached for another flower. "And your stubbornness," Eliza countered with a smile. Xavier's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you think she might like a brother or sister someday?" "Not right away, but perhaps in a year or two." Warmth bloomed in Eliza's chest at the thought of expanding their family. "I think she'd like that very much." "And so would I." The kiss they shared was interrupted by an indignant squawk from Hope, who had finally managed to grasp a dandelion and was now dismayed to find it dissolving into fluffy seeds in her fist. Laughing, Xavier scooped up their daughter and held her high above his head, making her giggle with delight. "Don't worry, little one. There are plenty more flowers to pick. A whole lifetime of them." As Eliza watched her husband and daughter playing in the dappled sunlight beside the creek, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From the depths of scandal and despair, she had found her way to this, a home, a family, a love she could trust. All because she'd fainted in a marketplace and a kind cowboy had caught her. Some might call it luck or coincidence. Eliza preferred to think of it as fate. That evening, as Xavier rocked Hope to sleep, singing a Spanish lullaby his mother had sung to him, Eliza penned a letter to her parents in Philadelphia, the first since she'd left over a year ago. She described Silver Creek, her teaching position, and most importantly, her husband and their beautiful daughter. She included no recriminations for their rejection, no bitterness for the choice they had forced upon her. Instead, she extended an olive branch, an invitation to know their granddaughter and the good man who had chosen to be her father. Whether they would respond remained to be seen. But as Eliza sealed the envelope, she felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever happened or didn't happen with her parents, her future was here in Silver Creek, with Xavier and Hope and the life they were building together. Later, as she slipped into bed beside her already sleeping husband, Eliza whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for bread shared with a stranger, for second chances, and for the remarkable journey that had brought her home at last. Xavier stirred, reaching for her even in sleep, and Eliza nestled against him, secure in the knowledge that some loves truly were meant to be, even if they began with a feint and a handful of crumbs in a dusty marketplace on the edge of the American frontier. In the years that followed, the Navarro family prospered. Eliza continued teaching until the birth of their son, James Xavier, in 1880, after which she divided her time between her growing family and tutoring the children on outlying ranches who couldn't attend the town school regularly. Xavier's partnership at the Rocking R expanded, eventually allowing them to purchase a substantial tract of land where they built a proper ranch house with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for the 3 more children who joined their family over the next decade. Hope grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman with her mother's love of books and her father's skill with horses. When she was 18, Xavier formally adopted her, though she had borne his name and known his love from infancy. The document they signed at the county courthouse merely made official what had always been true in their hearts. Hope Navarro was, in every way that mattered, her father's daughter. Eliza's parents never replied to her letter, but in 1885, a Philadelphia newspaper arrived addressed to Mrs. Eliza Navarro, containing an obituary for her father. 6 months later, to everyone's surprise, her mother appeared on the stagecoach, a stern-faced woman in mourning black who thawed considerably when 5-year-old Hope ran up to her with a wildflower bouquet and called her grandmother. Eleanor Nelson stayed for 3 weeks, long enough to witness the loving home her daughter had created and to develop a grudging respect for the half-Mexican cowboy who so clearly adored both Eliza and the children. When she left, promising to return the following summer, the last pieces of Eliza's broken past finally mended themselves whole. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and half the population of Silver Creek, Xavier took Eliza's hand and led her to the center of the dance floor. "Do you remember the first time I held you?" he asked as they swayed to the music. "How could I forget?" Eliza replied, her eyes still as bright at 50 as they had been at 25. "You fed me bread and changed my life." Xavier's smile creased the weathered skin around his eyes, now more silver than storm gray. "Best thing I ever did, catching you that day. Best thing that ever happened to me, falling into your arms," Eliza countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, oblivious to the indulgent smiles of their guests. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, they both knew with absolute certainty that some loves truly were written in the stars, meant to be, destined, fated. A fainting spell in a marketplace, a stranger's strong arms, bread shared between 2 souls who didn't yet know they were searching for each other. The beginning of everything.